Welcome everyone to this afternoon session of the AVCO, which will be all about the I would say extraordinary exit of Themis Bioscience to Merck, which happened in the first half of this year. I think it is fair to say that this exit set a new threshold actually for Austrian young biotech companies for the future, companies who are currently working on their own success story. So this session will be hosted by Roman sitting next to me from Brandl Talos, who's a partner at Brandl Talos. Brandl Talos was the legal advisor of most of the investors in Themis Bioscience for many years, and also in the course of the exit of the company. Myself, I'm a partner at Herbst Kinsky. I'm also a law firm who advised the company actually since its foundation, also in the course of the exit. To my left-hand side, and most importantly, I would say the key person in this whole success story we are talking about in the next 30 to 40 minutes, Mr. Erich Tauber, the founder of Themis. He founded Themis in 2009 and led the company to this landmark exit deal, so to speak. And in order to also get an insight from the investor's perspective, like an investor's view on the transaction, we are very glad to have Regina Hodits here to my right-hand side from Wellington Partners. She's managing partner at Wellington Partners, which is one of the global players in life sciences and venture capital. And Wellington Partners was also one of the lead investors in Themis.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for coming. Okay, so let me start with my first question to Erich. In your opinion, what were like the key success factors for Themis to get this to this exit?
Of course, we had the best lawyers in the world to
Thank you very
help
much.
the company and the best investors.
You will get the check later.
In addition to that, I think when Mr. Kinsky called me after the transaction, he said that I was so persistent. So I think persistence is maybe important. And what we have done 11 years ago was we were looking into a business model which was kind of foreseeing that there might be a need for something like a pandemic preparedness, a need for infectious disease, a need for outbreaks. So we were really preparing for a situation like we were experienced today. But at the same time, it's fair to say that we were always trying to build a company based on science, and we always believed in the science. And we were quite successful in making an operating model out of science.
Is there anything, like looking back into the past 11 years, that you would do differently now, if you could do it again?
I mean, there were quite a few learnings we had in the last 11 years. We learned quite a bit about Austrian corporate law, which has many advantages, but most of the advantages are outside of the needs for venture capital funded companies. And I think we didn't expect that corporate law in Austria is so prohibitive when it comes to the needs of a biotech company in terms of capital increases, in terms of IPO activities, and we don't know how it will happen with foreign investment policies in the future. But I would say that one of the learnings might be that we would have looked into improvements of the Corporate Act, and the other learning we made was that the venture capital industry in Europe and the venture capital industry in the USA are working quite differently. So I think we would have looked into the USA earlier than we have done.
What would be the major differences between the US capital venture industry and the European or the Austrian one? What would you say?
I think ticket size, capital, access to capital would be different. At the same time, there are many advantages in Europe, like valuation of companies is much lower in Europe than it is in the USA. But it's really speed and size of typical transactions in American venture capital.
Thank you.
So Regina, thank you for joining us here. I mean, Erich just told us actually that biotech companies had a lot of need for funding capital. You have invested into Themis quite early on, which is I think so from a lawyer's perspective, it's always a risky investment in biotech companies, given the amount of further investments required, and the risk profile of such companies. So what was your decisive factor for actually choosing Themis? I think at Wellington it was your first Austrian funded company, for choosing Themis to actually support them in their further way.
Well, first of all, let me say that I don't think that life science venture is a risky endeavor, especially if you actually look around in this crisis, and also if you look at the financial crisis. Usually our companies are well financed because they are financed to a next value creation point, which is a clinical study, which could be market introduction, which could be a proof of concept even at an earlier stage of a new way how to actually treat or diagnose patients. And we always have an unmet need in the market. It's not that we have to kind of fight for, does the world need now a vaccine? It does need a vaccine. And even if all the 10 were to make it, there would be something good that comes out of it, and this will not be the case. Of course, there's inherent development risk, and that brings me back to Themis. The story of the preparedness is something that resonated with us, and also if you look at our current investment strategy to look into the future, we actually believe that it's not only going to be virus-based diseases where vaccines are the best approach, we also are going to face a risk from resistant bacteria. So we are already looking for preparedness for the next wave to come. And in that respect, we looked also at Themis, but honestly, I have to say, in the end, we are there for making money. The reason we looked at Themis because we actually believed that Erich and his team had managed to develop a vaccine that reached the market before. And actually, when he approached us, it was not all about the big story and saving the world, which he is doing now. That came actually as an extra. He approached us with a very clear platform that can lead to a product and a product candidate. And we were not the first investors. We were not the visionaries. We were the people that came after he had actually shown in the clinic that it worked. And so that's actually what attracted us, was the sound team that knew what they were doing. They were not selling the world, although they could have. They were actually selling a product.
So Erich basically outperformed then your investment hypothesis with the product he has finally produced or working on?
So we usually have to give these kind of exit evaluations to our investors, and I think it was not quite a factor of 10, but getting close to our own expectations.
Thank you. So Erich, then maybe coming back to the exit of Themis. Yeah, I mean, according to my recollection, you actually tried an IPO, I think 2018, 2019, which also due to the economic environment at that point in time failed. So when did you actually recognize that during the COVID pandemic it would be the right point in time to actually try to sell Themis, try to actually achieve a liquidity event for the shareholders?
I mean, it was not the case that in April 1st we woke up and said, now it's the time to sell the company. We are a venture capital funded company, and one of the tasks we were getting from each and every investor was to set up processes which will allow us to sell the company at some stage. And what's also fair to say is that the company is never sold, it's always acquired. And what we have done in the last 11 years was, on the one hand side, to work on the science, to work on the products, and on the other side, to work, and this is very difficult for scientific-oriented companies, to sell the company at some stage. So we were building up relationships with potential acquirers, which until March, until March, the vaccine space was a dead space. Nobody cared about vaccines until March 2020. So until that time, there were 5 players in the world which would have been potentially interested. And what we have also done in the last 11 years, on the one hand side, educated potential acquirers about the company, but also educated potential investors on the company. And we have started to educate European investors back in 2009, and we have started to educate also American investors then in the year 2018. And 2019 was really a roadshowing year where we have done nothing else than to roadshow in New York and in San Francisco to build up for a Nasdaq IPO and to prepare for a Nasdaq IPO. And in the last private round, also MSD, and MSD is how Merck is known outside the US and Canada. So MSD was a shareholder since 2019, but more importantly, we have started a R&D collaboration with a specific target already last year, and so it all came together.
So quite a lot of work actually organizing the exit for many years.
Yes, being a biotech entrepreneur is not only playing golf and yachting, it's a bit of work as well.
It should get better now, hopefully. And I mean, as regards the process, so what we learn from transaction we are doing is that, I mean, the process is tremendously exhausting for the management team normally, the exit process, given the fact that normally you do not have the capacities to run an exit process while doing your day-to-day business, so to say. So what was your impression of the process? Was it a smooth process? Was it exhausting? Was it complicated? Were there any hiccups?
I mean, what has happened was that we have really started the process with MSD during the quarantine period. But even before that, the company was in due diligence mode for the last 10 years. So what was the case is that especially I was more involved talking to potential investors, talking to potential partners than in the day-to-day business. But during the due diligence, also the people who typically develop vaccines were of course also in the due diligence process. But one advantage of doing an exit in quarantine is that everybody has time. We had many meetings or teleconferences on Easter Sunday, and everybody had time. Nobody was at the grandparents, nobody was in the Caribbean, and nobody was in the airport. So I think it was a transaction in this time frame could not have taken place outside a quarantine setting.
How long did it take? So from initial talks until
it was a couple of weeks.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm coming back to Regina. So, in your opinion, from an investor's perspective, what are the crucial points in organizing an exit process, and how did you perceive the exit process at Themis in this respect?
Before I come to that, I have to say I'm reading a book that's called Your Brain is a Time Machine, and I think Erich is a perfect example of that. Having taken a few weeks from the initial offer to actually closing the deal is certainly in recollection something. If you take a couple of months as a couple of weeks, that's probably right. But it's actually just probably goes to say that these couple of months basically probably felt like a couple of days in the end, because they just rushed by so fast because there was so much to do.
Also fast as council.
Humongous effort. And also, I mean, mainly of course, honestly, by Erich, because he was left, right and center everywhere, but also by your team. This was not something that was done lazily on Easter Sunday afternoon, sitting and having a chat with MSD. This was a complicated transaction. There were several research institutes involved. There were several countries involved with regards to the investor sides, with regards to the acquirer side. There were several law firms involved from San Francisco to Boston to here to Paris. So this was by all means, if you actually wanted to go on the scale of complexity, this was an exit that is a complexity of 9.5 of a scale of 10. Because the one other thing which Erich didn't tell you, that in parallel he'd been negotiating with a syndicate of US investors that was prepared to put a significant amount of money into the company and take Erich actually public this summer. And we had a very, very tough decision, basically until the last moment, because a number of us were kind of sitting between the bird in the hand and actually the much larger bird that actually potentially could have been there on the stock market until really the very last moment. So it was absolutely the most exciting, honestly, exit process that I've been involved. The last time we had not half as much excitement was actually when we brought GenMap public just before the market closed in 2001, so it's been a while. Exit processes never run smoothly, but they can be very well prepared. And what Erich actually said, the being prepared for an IPO, because this is the path a company can take by themselves, helps a lot to be prepared for due diligence and also to be prepared to walk away. Because the one thing you ever need for any exit process to manage it really well is an alternative. In the absence of an alternative, you're basically with your back against the wall and you're driven by the forces around you. And I think the team has played that very well. I also think that the team has done, or Erich has done very wisely to make sure that he's not out there by himself. So you were supported by your colleagues on the management board, like Philippe Draw, who's both board and management board, by your chairman as well, that were also partly with you in the negotiations, which I think is important. And the other thing which Erich actually did very early on by suggestion also of the investors, but I think you grabbed that also very fast, was actually to think about a strong team of advisors. And that certainly helps. That goes from both transaction advisors to legal advisors, just to make sure they have the strongest team around you.
Thank you very much. Maybe an additional question here. To what extent did the COVID-19 crisis and the restrictions associated with the COVID-19 crisis impact the exit process? How did you experience that?
It's a very interesting question. I think the biggest impact, of course, was the fact that there was interest, and the biggest impact was in the end the political impact, mainly also by the Foreign Investment Act. And honestly, this is going to be, if it's not done rightly, this is going to cripple the industry on the life science side in Europe for the decades to come. So all of the good that the Themis exit can do can be destroyed by this not being handled with care.
So you're talking about the investment control mechanisms in Austria, which currently...
Austria, Germany, wherever. If in Europe we actually make it impossible for foreign investment to come in, Erich said that very clearly, then we're going to have a very different problem going forward. But that aside, I agree with Erich. I think in the end it did help us because people were focused, and of course the reason why we actually went, no, but there's a number of reasons, but in my view, one of the things that actually weighed in strongly in the trade sale process, and especially to Merck, was the belief that Merck could actually develop this vaccine to the market and could actually produce it and supply it globally. This is also, of course, reflected in the deal structure, so we have a financial incentive in that, being investors, but also it is something that was important for us to make sure that this product actually reaches the market, and that the drive towards that was certainly enhanced by the crisis.
Thank you very much.
There's maybe one item I want to add. We've spoken about corporate law in Austria. Being in a situation where everybody is in quarantine in San Francisco, in Paris, in wherever, but still with the need to go to a notary to sign a power of attorney, which then is supposed to be shipped from San Francisco at a time when no airplanes are flying, was really a task.
Oh, that is certainly not facilitating such a process. I totally agree on this. Maybe another question for you, Erich. How is now the integration of Themis working into this big international group of Merck? I mean, I can imagine for you as a founder, a startup founder, this must be a different world now. So what is your experience here now?
I mean, we are very impressed by the spirit of MSD and the skills they have on the managerial and the scientific side, and also the culture they have. MSD has a long heritage of working to protect health around the world. They have been the first company to license an Ebola vaccine, and so we are very happy to work with them together. The focus right now was to integrate the COVID vaccine project into the larger organization. It's very important for us to make sure that we can have an impact for health in the world by making sure that the large organization of like 70,000 people helps us or we help them to produce hundreds of millions of vaccine doses. And this is by far the most dominant activity right now. And we are in the early stages of this integration. The aim is that there will be a survival of the Vienna site. The aim is that MSD will invest into the Vienna site to build a site for pandemic preparedness. And
just for you personally, with the mindset of an entrepreneur, does that fit together with the mindset of a big international group?
I think there are many mindsets in a big international group, and I think it was quite entrepreneurial from the MSD management to partner with us and to make a COVID vaccine in like less than a year.
Okay. And just one last question from my side. I hope you can tell us a little bit here about how the COVID-19 vaccine is progressing in terms of development of the vaccine.
We have started clinical trials. It's a number of clinical trials, and some of them are still done under collaboration with the Institut Pasteur, who have invented some of the technologies. And it's a nice example where academic research and biotech and a large corporation work together to bring things together. We are working very hard to prepare for large-scale clinical trials and for manufacturing of hundreds of millions of doses, and it's difficult to predict when we are there.
So do you think we will have a vaccine next summer?
Being a employee of MSD, I can tell you that we are working hard to make the vaccine.
Thank you.
So then maybe coming to the end already, we do have at least one question which we would answer, I think, after our last question. So Regina, I mean, as you have said, the Themis transaction has been one of the most exciting transactions you have worked on, basically. So do you think that having such a transaction in Austria could have a potentially positive impact on the biotech scene overall, or do you think that at the end it's, you know, one case and we will have to wait for another 10 years to find the next case?
I mean, our stronghold is investments in the German-speaking area, and if you actually see right now that out of the top 10 vaccine contenders for vaccines on COVID, 3 of them are out of the German ecosystem, and Themis being one of them. And I am still a strong believer in what Erich said, and I can say that I believe that they will make it, because we need a scalable way to actually get to a vaccine. And having a company in Vienna that has been financed mainly by European VC, meaning initially until the last round, and by public grant money, getting on center stage of the world, if that is not giving hope to actually entrepreneurs from all parts of Europe, and especially from Austria, that they can make it, then I don't understand what will do that. The other thing what Themis has built, Erich started off with, I think, 2 trusted people from the start, and then built the team up to around 35, 8 in that? 40 people that have all been trained on actually how can you, in an environment where there's no support but yourself, develop something really meaningful. And all of those people are there, and they will spread the word around, so that by itself will help. There's also a couple of things, since I have some lawyers here, that definitely need to be learned and helped for people to be motivated in the future. So that goes to the Austrian legal system and to the German one. If we don't get our act together to actually incentivize the employees to take the risk to not stay at MSD and get their bonuses at the end of the year, but actually we want to incentivize them to be entrepreneurial and actually work in small companies. If we don't get the employee incentive schemes better worked up here, we'll have a real issue to completely capitalize on the positive impact that Themis could have.
I couldn't agree more on that point, honestly. So Erich, what actually, I mean, you know, having the Themis transaction completed, what actually changed your life? I understand that you're now working in a big corporation, yeah. What do you think will actually happen with the Austrian scene? Will you still have an eye on it, or are there any, you know, new companies emerging you're already aware of which could make a similar step, so to say?
So far in the last months I have focused on my own life and not on the ecosystem, but I have started to work in the biotech industry like 17, 18 years ago, when there was Igenion, when there was Intercell, Green Hills, Austria, Nova, and not all of them had a good outcome, but at least this was really a time where lots of people in Austria have started to think that biotech is a part of reality. And what I would expect and hope is that this transaction would trigger a similar development. And I think success is a good motivation for others to copy that.
Thank you. So then I think we have received at least one question. I think that's one for you, Florian, actually. Namely, would it have been possible to close this deal under the new Austrian Foreign Investment Act, which is a question by the audience, actually.
I think. Sorry.
Yeah, I think you're best placed to actually answer it.
No, I think it would have been possible to close that deal, but it would have been even more complicated than it already was. I mean, we had the issue with the Austrian Foreign Trade Act back then. Now we have a new law called Investitionskontrollgesetz, and it's more or less the same issue. I think, now it is even more strict, the law, in terms of investment control than it was like half a year ago. But nevertheless, we had the issue back then, and we would have dealt with it also in the current situation. So yes, I think we could have closed the deal anyways.
May I ask a question there? I mean, I don't know exactly what the rules are now in Austria, but in Germany, basically, we have to wait for 3 months before we can actually close an investment, or before we can close a transaction. I tell you one thing, if this transaction would have lasted a week longer, Merck would have walked away because they wouldn't have been part of the Warp Speed program. So we had a week.
No, I think in the end it was the close coordination with the authorities that made that deal happen, because like half a year ago the law wasn't that clear, for example, if indirect transactions were covered by the law or not, and I think in the current situation with the current law, we just do the same thing. Actually, we would coordinate with the authorities. We would try to get confirmations that maybe we wouldn't have to wait for 1 or 2 months, but only for 1 or 2 weeks. So I think the authorities were quite collaborative in this respect, even if it was a quite hard process. And I think everybody felt that or let me put it that way, I think a lot of people in this deal didn't really understand why we had to do that circle with the authorities. But I think in the end it was good that we did it
I
to
don't
get
think
legal safety
anybody
here.
is actually saying that the authorities didn't try to help and that everybody here was trying to get this to work, because I think people knew what is on stake. But now let's just assume it would have been a migraine drug. Still a company that had worked hard and had an exit at the table. I'm not sure we would have gotten any attention. And And their 3 months delay or whatever 6 months it could have taken in the worst case would have certainly led to the buyer going away. So I think we need to kind of still work on general rules that apply to not only very special cases like here, and the cooperation was much appreciated and it worked really well, absolutely. Nobody says that this isn't the case. But what the industry needs is clear rules and clear processes that can be followed and are in line with international industry practice.
No, I totally agree with you on this one, yes.
So I think we do not have further questions. So I think we are at the end. So thank you, Erich. Thank you, Regina, for very much for actually taking your time, for telling very interesting story around the transaction. That was very, very, very interesting to us. Thank you very much for taking the time.
And thank you guys for all your help.